I get it, you've been scrolling through endless videos of people turning cheap plastic into perfect mini figurines, then someone drops a laser engraved wood keychain into the mix, and you're left wondering if you should finally shell out for a machine that does it all. Before you spend a weekend of money and space setting up something that might end up collecting dust, I'm going to walk through the Snapmaker 3-in-1 Addons for the Artisan and see if it actually lives up to the hype. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the Artisan itself is already a solid 3D printer, but this bundle tries to turn it into a 3-tool workshop, a 200W CNC carving head, a 40W laser engraver, and an enclosure that keeps temperature stable for long prints. The idea sounds perfect for a hobbyist who wants to switch from printing a prototype to etching a logo on a wooden badge without buying 3 separate machines. But the real question is how smooth that switch really is once you have the hardware in front of you. Let's start with the practical side of setting it up. The CNC module arrives as a fairly hefty metal box that bolts onto the same gantry the printer uses. In my experience, the alignment process is the most fiddly part. The manual walks you through loosening the axis rails, sliding the CNC head into place, and then tightening everything back down. If you've never dealt with a mill before, you'll spend a good half-hour double-checking that the spindle is perpendicular to the bed. The laser module is lighter, but it still needs its own calibration routine to make sure the beam hits exactly where the nozzle would have. The enclosure is basically a framed acrylic box that clips onto the printer's frame. You'll need a screwdriver to tighten the corner brackets, and you'll notice a slight wobble if the screws aren't snug. So, the initial build isn't a plug-and-play experience, but it's not beyond a competent maker's ability either, just plan for an afternoon of tweaking. Once you've got the hardware mounted, daily usability becomes the next test. The Artisan's touchscreen interface now offers a drop-down to pick print, CNC, or laser. Switching between modes is as simple as tapping, but each mode brings its own software requirements. For 3D printing, you still use the Snapmaker Lubon slicer. For CNC, you need a CAM workflow that generates code, and for laser, you'll be importing SVG files. The biggest hidden trade-off is that the same bed is shared across all 3 processes, so you have to change the build surface depending on what you're doing. The printer comes with a magnetic PEI sheet for printing, but you'll want a sacrificial wood board for CNC and a laser-safe matte surface for engraving. Swapping those plates takes a minute, but if you're hopping between projects every hour, it can add up. Now, who actually benefits from this 3-in-1 approach? If you're a hobbyist who already knows you'll be mixing materials, say, you print a PLA housing, then laser etch a logo onto the front panel, and finally CN carve a mounting bracket, the value proposition is solid. You're essentially paying for the convenience of one machine that shares a motion system, which means you don't have to buy separate stepper drivers, power supplies, or a second frame. The 200W CNC spindle is powerful enough for soft woods, acrylic, and PCB routing, while the 40W laser can cut thin cardstock and engrave leather, wood, and anodized aluminum. That covers a lot of the typical maker's weekend projects without having to hunt for a separate laser cutter. On the flip side, if your primary love language is high-resolution 3D prints, you might be better off spending that budget on a dedicated printer with a larger build volume or a more refined extruder. The Artisan's print quality is respectable, but the shared motion system means the CNC and laser heads add extra weight to the gantry. When you're back to printing, you may notice a slight increase in ringing on sharp corners compared to a printer that only ever moves a lightweight hot end. Also, the CNC module's 200W spindle isn't meant for metal milling. If you were hoping to carve aluminum or brass, you'll quickly discover the motor stalls. The laser, while capable, is limited to 40W, so cutting thicker wood, over 5 mm, will be painfully slow or simply impossible. A real-world use case I tried was making a custom desk organizer. I printed the main frame in PLA, then swapped to the laser to engrave my name on the lid, and finally used the CNC head to carve a shallow groove for a cable channel on the side. Each step took roughly the same amount of prep time as if I'd used 3 separate machines, but the biggest win was not having to recalibrate a whole new workbench each time. The enclosure also helped during the long print. By keeping temperature stable, I avoided the usual warping that sometimes shows up on taller prints. However, there's a downside that shows up when you start using all three tools.